The pen stalled half an inch above the paper as the room shook. Dust sifted down from the ceiling of the war rooms. The electric lamp swung a fraction. Somewhere far above, on the surface of London, a German bomb bloomed in brick and glass. Winston Churchill did not look up. His eyes, pale and hard, were locked on the last line of the memorandum in front of him. His cigar had burned almost to ash in his left hand. Tarzio and Aequius ts tire d ed Kyle, usi kamarsi, born fels, the comments to Amaska IVSEOOF Psychical. The words looked absurd and vicious on the page. Another concussion rolled through the underground chamber, rattling teacups on their saucers. A clerk flinched. The clock on the wall jumped forward a second, and then steadied. Churchill could feel every gaze in the room anchored on that unmoving pen. If he signed, an unknown dead man would be chained to a leather case and dropped into the sea as bait. If he didn't, they would send living men into Sicily under the full weight of German expectation. He glanced up at the map pinned to the far wall. The Mediterranean sprawled across it, studded with colored pins. North Africa, newly won. Malta, scarred but stubborn. Italy hanging above like a boot waiting to stamp. Sicile, someone had circled in red. He knew exactly how many ships would sail for that island in a few months. How many aircraft would cover them? How many men would be in the first waves? Hemmed into landing craft with nowhere to run if the beaches blossomed in fire. Everyone with a school atlas could see it. He'd told the chiefs. Sicily is the obvious target. Exactly, they'd replied. The Germans can see it too. He looked across the table at the quiet, watchful man who had brought him this monstrous suggestion. Commander Ewan Montagu of Naval Intelligence stood with his hands clasped behind his back, looking as if he'd slept in his uniform. His eyes, set deep behind round spectacles, were lined with fatigue. Papers stuck out of his briefcase at odd angles. "Well, Montagu," Churchill said, voice dry, over the distant growl of another explosion. "You wish me to sign off on using a corpse as a courier to fool the Hun?" "Yes, Prime Minister," Montagu said. His voice didn't waver, though his knuckles had gone white where they gripped the chair back. "We have the body. We can make him an officer. We can give him a life. And we can put into his hands a story that Berlin desperately wants to believe." Churchill studied him. "Is there any precedent in history?" he asked quietly, "for a war being swung on the pocket, litter of a dead man?" Montagu didn't smile. "No, sir," he said. "There will be if this works." A tremor of amusement passed over Churchill's face and vanished. "And if it fails?" he pressed. "If the Spaniards are too careful, if the Germans are too clever, if they smell a rat, what then?" "Then," Montagu said, and there was no spin in it, no evasion, "the enemy will reinforce Sicily, and our men will land into the teeth of that. The body will still lie in a foreign grave. We will simply have accomplished nothing with him." Churchill allowed himself a long breath out through his nose. It wasn't just Sicily at stake in this decision. It was trust, Spain's brittle neutrality, the Americans' faith in British cunning, his own conviction that he could still outthink the man in Berlin. But beneath all that, under the statistics and the maps and the memos, there was something more primitive. He was about to sign his name on an order that turned a corpse into a weapon. The room fell utterly silent for a moment. Even the muffled thud of bombs above seemed to recede. "Very well," Churchill said. He lowered the pen. The nib scraped softly as he wrote his name at the bottom of the page, the ink biting into the thick paper. "I authorize Operation Mincemeat," he said. "Use your dead man. Make the Germans dance the wrong way." He set the pen down, sudden weariness edging his shoulders. "And, Montagu," he added, almost as an afterthought, "if we are to deceive, let us do it thoroughly. Give this fellow a proper English life to lose." The war room seemed to exhale. On the far side of London, in the cold, tiled hush of St. Pancras mortuary, a sheeted body waited under the flickering strip light, unaware that the Prime Minister of Great Britain had just written his fate in ink. 3 days earlier, Montagu had stood in that room shivering in his greatcoat, breath puffing faintly in the morgue's chill. The pathologist, a small, harried man with a permanent smell of formalin about him, had led him past a row of slabs. "This way," the doctor had said, voice echoing off tiles. "We've something that may suit you." The sheet peeled back with a faint crackle. Underneath lay a thin man in his 30s, dark hair plastered to a pale forehead. The jaw was slack. The lips had a bluish tinge. The hands, resting by his sides, were callosed but clean. "What was his name?" Montagu asked. The doctor checked a card. "Glyndwr Michael, Welsh, 34. No fixed address. Found in an abandoned warehouse in King's Cross. Rat poison, we think. Phosphide paste. He was probably looking for food." Montagu looked at the dead man's face. There was nothing remarkable about it. Not handsome, not ugly. Features that could vanish easily into a crowd. "He has no family?" Montagu asked. "None we can trace," the doctor said. "No one claimed him." Montagu exhaled slowly. No one claimed him. No one knew him. The idea that this anonymous soul, who had died hungry and alone in a cold corner of the city, might now alter the path of armies felt like something out of bad theater. And yet, "Can his lungs pass for a drowning?" Montagu asked, forcing himself to keep his voice clinical. The pathologist shrugged. "Phosphide will cause some pulmonary edema, fluid in the lungs. But if he were in the sea for a few hours, a Spanish doctor won't know whether the water came from the ocean or from his last drink. We can keep him refrigerated. We must move quickly." Montagu nodded. This was the man. The pathologist covered the body again with the sheet. It settled over the still form with a sigh of cloth. Outside, the morgue door closed with a hollow thump, leaving Glyndwr Michael behind. Inside Montagu's head, another man was already taking shape. An officer, a major, perhaps. An age where promotion and responsibility made sense. Married. No, better engaged, for human color. From a respectable family. A bank account, a tailor's bill, a taste for cigarettes. Naval attached work, maybe. To justify traveling with sensitive papers. He walked back to the Admiralty through streets, pocked with bomb craters, feeling the weight of an invisible life, growing heavier with every step. Room 13 smelled of stale tea and ink and tired men. Maps were pinned at odd angles to the walls. The black list of known enemy agents hung beside them, faces staring out of grainy photographs. A kettle rattled to a boil on a small gas ring in the corner. Lieutenant Charles Cholmondeley, tall, angular, with the distracted air of a man whose mind ran ahead of his body, lounged in a chair with his long legs flung out, a half-eaten sandwich forgotten on a plate beside him. He looked up as Montagu came in. "Well," Cholmondeley asked. "Have we found our Lazarus?" Montagu dropped his hat on the table and sat down heavily. "We have a body," he said. "Glyndwr Michael. No family, no one to object." Died in a warehouse with rat poison in his stomach. Cholmondeley winced. Not the most heroic backstory. He won't need a backstory, Montague said, reaching for a pad of paper. He'll need a new story entirely, he wrote in block capitals at the top of the page. Major will I am Martui. Rawal Morines, why a Marine? Cholmondeley asked, leaning forward. Because they're everywhere, Montague said. Attached to ships, staff, amphibious operations. A Royal Marine in naval kit will raise no eyebrows carrying letters between admirals and generals. And the rank senior enough to be trusted, junior enough to be expendable. Cholmondeley nodded, eyes lighting with the sly excitement of a storyteller offered a blank page. Very well, he said. Let's give Major Martin something to miss when he drowns. They built the man in layers. Birth certificate, to anchor him in Britain. Parents in Cardiff. School records, slightly above average marks, good at games. Officer training. The war coming at just the right time for him to be promoted briskly. They gave him a letter from his bank, politely scolding him for an overdrawn account. They gave him a silver pencil engraved, "From Father." A Cholmondeley insisted on a love interest. No man of that age in wartime without some girl to write to, he said. The Germans aren't fools. They know their own officers. They'll expect distractions. He produced a photograph from his pocket. One of the secretaries from upstairs, laughing at a picnic, her hair blown half out of its pins by the wind. Pam, he said. She looks like a Pam, don't you think? Montague rubbed his temples. Does she know you've volunteered her for national service? Only that I asked to borrow her picture, for some paperwork. Cholmondeley said cheerfully. She's used to worse. They composed a letter from Pam to Bill on thin, creased notepaper, in a woman's neat hand. My darling, I'm so glad you like the snaps. Mother says the one of you pretending to push the cow is her favorite. But I prefer the one where you're trying to look serious and just end up looking cross. I have decided that when you get back, we are never having our picture taken again, unless I can approve it first. They argued over how affectionate she would be on paper, how often she would mention his habits, whether she would be cross about him not writing enough. In the end, they made her almost, but not quite too real. You're enjoying this, Montague accused at one point, watching Cholmondeley agonize over whether Pam dotted her eyes with circles. Of course I am, Cholmondeley retorted. We're writing a man. If we get him right, the Abwehr will lap up everything he carries. If we get him wrong, they'll smell contrivance. Deception is a performance art. Ewan. The performance's centerpiece was not a lover's note, nor a bank slip. It was 2 letters, typed on different typewriters, in different rooms, by different hands. One from the Vice Chief of the Imperial General Staff to General Sir Harold Alexander in North Africa. One from the Deputy Chief of Naval Staff to Admiral Sir Andrew Cunningham in the Mediterranean. In them, couched in the elliptical, half-said style of staff correspondence, lay the lie they wanted the Germans to swallow. That the Allies were planning their main thrust not at Sicily, but at Greece and Sardinia. Montague and a draughtsman from the War Office sat side by side, authentic letters scattered around them, mimicking phrase patterns like actors mimicking accents. We cannot speak plainly, Montague muttered, editing a sentence for the 10th time. No one would put Dear Harold. We're invading here on this date, in a courier's bag. So we allude, the draftsman said, we mention Cagliari. We speak of feints and threats in being. We refer to previous discussions that never happened. They wrote, appreciate your concerns about the necessity to convince the enemy of a major assault on the Peloponnese. Resources for USKY must not detract from the effort in the Eastern Mediterranean. Sicily to be threatened but not stripped of forces prematurely. They left the mind eager to find patterns, for a mind eager to find patterns. For the eager to find patterns. When they finished, Montague slid the letters into official envelopes, sealed them, and pressed the appropriate wax over the flaps. The wax cooled with a dull sheen. All these pieces, the letters, the photograph, the bank note, the theater ticket, the identity card with its slightly blurred photograph, and the ink stamp smudged at one edge, went into a small wooden box. They felt heavier than they should in Montague's hands. Later that day, under the mortuary's unflattering light, Glinder Michael became Major William Martin. The pathologist and 2 Navy ratings dressed the corpse carefully, in a Royal Marines battle dress, life jacket, and a worn greatcoat. The brass on the cap badge gleamed dully. The webbing sat snug around hips that would never move again. Montague stood close enough to smell the formaldehyde seeping from the dead flesh. He slipped the leather wallet into the inside pocket himself, fingers brushing cold fabric. He tucked Pam's letter, folded and refolded until the creases began to whiten, into an envelope addressed in her hand. He took the identity card, a small rectangle of stiff paper, and slid it into the plastic window of a battered brown wallet, behind 3-pound notes and a train ticket. For a moment, he hesitated with the dog tag in his hand. It was stamped now not with GYDNWRIKHAEL but with MAR-LOAMA AJORRM. He looped it around the slack neck. There, Cholmondeley said softly from behind him. Now he can be mourned. Montague had no words for that. The final addition was the black leather attaché case. They chained it to his belt with a thin steel cable, the kind used to prevent theft, and secured the lock with a small padlock, whose key would be in his pocket. When they closed the canister around him, a cylindrical steel container marked as optical equipment, with dry ice packed around the body until the air inside smoked. The clank of the lid felt like the door of a tomb. There was no ceremony, just signatures on forms, a receipt signed by an anonymous petty officer, a van idling in the alley, engine ticking. HMS Seraph waited for him in Holy Loch, her black hull slick with rain, her crew ignorant of the exact nature of the cargo they would carry into the teeth of the enemy's patrols. Lieutenant Norman Bill Jewell, commanding officer of Seraph, read the orders in his cramped cabin while the diesel engines throbbed softly through the hull. Tow LTN. J. Buell. Chemisera P. Espelo Pirion Tau Pia Read. He skimmed the written instructions, then read them again more slowly. Transport canister to coordinates off Huelva, Spain. Surface secretly. Deposit body and briefcase in position. No contact with Spanish vessels. No deviation. On completion, depart immediately. A line in heavy pencil at the bottom. An afterthought written by someone sufficiently senior that they didn't sign their name. UNDR UMS 10 XSES must do orienty to Anatar BXFCOCD OREX Amend. Jewell frowned. He carried odd cargo before. Saboteurs, seals for subterfuge, even boxes of carrier pigeons. But this, he imagined for a second opening the canister in a storm and finding it full of snakes, or maybe a ticking device. Then he shrugged it off. The job was to carry. The Admiralty could keep its secrets. The canister arrived at dusk, winched aboard by a sweating dock, crew under a tarpaulin, cranes squealing. It hit the deck with a dull metallic thump that echoed into the pressure hull. The men grumbled as they lashed it in place. "Feels like a bloody anvil," one muttered, rubbing his shoulder. "Optical equipment, my arse," another said. "Probably some fancy champagne for the brass in Gibraltar." Jewel watched, expression unreadable. "Secure it well," he said. "If that thing breaks loose in a seaway, we'll all be swimming." Seraph slid out into the Firth under cover of night, periscope shears barely breaking the surface. The sea was iron gray. The horizon vanished into low cloud. The wind carried the wet tang of the north. Inside, red battle lanterns cast everything in a blood-tinged gloom. Men moved through the tight spaces with the surety born of repetition, ducking under pipes, swinging past bulkheads. After the first day, Jewel noticed a thin film of frost inside the canister lid. The dry ice was doing its work. He ran a hand over the cold metal, feeling it burn his fingertips. "What have they put in you?" he murmured to the silent cylinder. The Bay of Biscay was a killer. By the time Seraph nosed into it, the weather had sharpened. Waves slapped the hull with dull booms when she surfaced at night to recharge batteries. Spray hissed over the bridge, soaking watch officers to the skin in seconds. Jewel stood on the narrow, wet platform in his oilskins, eyes locked on the black sky, ears pricked for the drone of engines. Radar contact. The Aztec operator crackled over the bridge telephone early one dawn. Range 8 miles. Closing. Bearing red 07. Jewel's stomach clenched. Condor. Long-range Fu-200 bombers hunted this gray stretch endlessly, their crews trained to spot even the hint of a periscope wake. "Crash dive," Jewel ordered. No. The bridge crew vanished down the conning tower hatch like men escaping a fire. The last sailor's boots disappeared as the hatch wheel spun, and seawater lashed across the steel. Klaxons yelped inside. Men tumbled into positions. Vents slammed. Compressed air roared into ballast tanks. Seraph's nose dipped. The deck slanted under Jewel's feet as he clung to the periscope standard, watching the depth gauge needle spin. 30 feet, 50, 70. The hull creaked under increasing pressure. Condensation shook loose from pipes, falling in cold droplets onto bare necks. In the forward casing, the steel cylinder trembled against its lashings. In the absolute dark inside the canister, ice smoked and melted around an unmoving form. Level at 90. Jewel snapped. Al stopped. Silent running. Engines died. Fans slowed. The boat settled into a ghostly quiet broken only by the soft tick of metal and the faint, distant thrum of the condor searching above. Every creak of the hull sounded like the prelude to crushing. Jewel could hear his own breathing, loud in his ears. Minutes passed like hours. At last, the hydrophone operator, wearing heavy rubberized earphones, lifted one hand in the cramped sound room. "Aircraft receding," he whispered. "Engine note diminishing. Bearing changing. He's missed us." A collective breath escaped the submarine. The cylinder lay silent and still. By the time they reached the waters off Huelva, Spain, the dry ice was almost gone. Jewel watched the last of the vapor curl thinly from under the lid when he checked the lashings. The Admiralty's time calculations had been precise. Too long in transit, and the corpse would begin to decay. Too short, and the deception would look absurdly fresh. Now at 2 in the morning on April 30th, Seraph lay just beneath the surface 10 miles off the Spanish coast, listening. The hydrophone room reported no screws, no sonar pings, no distant hum of fishing boats. Surface. Jewel ordered. Ballast blew. The deck came up. The conning tower hatch swung open with a hiss of salt air. Cold night rushed in. Jewel climbed up, feeling the chill bite through his clothes. The sea rolled black and indifferent to the horizon. A smear of faint light marked the town of Huelva in the distance. "Deck party," he called softly. "Bring up the canister. Quietly now." Barely lit by shuttered lamps, the men manhandled the heavy steel cylinder onto the narrow, wet deck. They unbolted the lid. A whiteness of fog rolled out, veiling the shapes of men. Someone swore softly as the smell reached them. A sweet, cloying note tangled with the sharp tang of the sea. Jewel forced himself to look inside. The body, in uniform and greatcoat, lay cradled in the metal compromise between coffin and crate, face already beating with condensation. The features were slack, but horribly not yet decayed. It looked like a man frozen mid-sleep. The life jacket sat correctly. The dog tag glinted dully around his waist. The chain led to the black attaché case, clamped shut. A petty officer passed up a canvas bag. Inside were the final details from room 3D, a letter from the father, expressing mild disappointment about the overdraft, a ticket stub for a show in London, 2 stubbed-out cigarettes in a pocket tin. Montagu had added a St. Christopher medallion on a last-minute impulse, hanging it on the same chain as the dog tag. "Right," Jewel said softly. "Let's get Major Martin ready." They worked fast, fingers numb, breath misting. They checked the chain, the lock, the pockets. Jewel looked toward the dark bulk of the Spanish coastline. Neutral waters, on paper. A chessboard for German and British spies in reality. If a fisherman or patrol boat glimpsed a surfaced submarine this close in, questions would follow. "On my mark. We lift," he said. "And mind that chain. If we drop the case, we may as well all go home." They each took hold. Shoulders, boots, underarms. Dead flesh gave under their grip. The body came up awkwardly, tugging at its dead weight. Limbs flopping with the awful bondlessness of a man, with no muscles tensed against gravity. They shuffled to the edge. The sea surged against the hull, black and cold. Foam hissed. "Over he goes," Jewel said. For an instant, the corpse was balanced on the razor edge of steel and air, face tilted toward the night sky. It would never see. Then the deck heaved. The body tipped. It slid off the hull and dropped. The splash was a flat, thick sound. The briefcase yanked downward, chain tightening, dragging the man slowly under. For a few seconds he floated, face just beneath the surface, pale in the lamplight. Then a wave rolled over him, and he was gone. The water closed as if he had never been there. Jewel stared at the spot until his eyes watered. "Secure all," he said at last. His voice sounded oddly hoarse. "Take us down." Same course out. The hatch clanged shut over his head. The submarine slid beneath the black, leaving the dead man to his slow drift toward the Spanish shore. Dawn came gray and indifferent over the gulf of sea Diz. On the deck of his small wooden fishing boat, Miguel Ortega cursed as his net snagged on something heavy. "Careful." "Hombre," his cousin called, knuckles whitening on the wet rope. "You'll snap the line." "I've got it," Miguel grunted, bracing his feet. The sea heaved under the hull, dark water slapping the planks. Together they hauled, backs screaming. A shape broke the surface, a dark, limp bulk caught in the mesh. For a moment Miguel thought it was a tuna. Then a pale hand flopped free, fingers splayed, and a human face rolled toward him with eyes half open, mouth slack. Dios mo, Miguel breathed, recoiling. It's a man. They brought the body aboard, grunting with the effort. Water gushed from the greatcoat, pooling around their boots. The man wore a uniform Miguel didn't recognize immediately, but the cut said officer. The life jacket had ridden up around his neck, chafing the skin raw where the straps bit. Around the waist, a chain linked to a black briefcase that bumped against the hull, semi-submerged. English, the cousin muttered, pointing at the small badge on the cap. Or one of those Americans. Miguel frowned at the dog tag, unable to read the foreign words. Looks like money, whatever he is, he muttered. The Guardia Civil will be interested. And the Germans. They eyed the case chained to the corpse. Should we open it? His cousin asked. Miguel shook his head. Not on the boat, he said. If the Ingles find out, they'll have us shot. We take him in. We say we touched nothing. The morgue in Huelva smelled of bleach and fish and stale cigar smoke. Dr. Fernandez, the municipal pathologist, pushed his glasses up his nose and sighed as they wheeled in another dead foreigner. The war had filled his days with drowned sailors and crashed airmen. Neutrality did not keep bodies off his table. He checked the uniform, noting the Royal Marines insignia with a flicker of recognition. He had seen British men in similar gear drinking in the harbor bars, trying not to look like spies. He saw the briefcase, chained to the belt. His eyes lingered on it. Guardia, he said to the civil guard sergeant hovering by the door. Have you informed the British consul? SC, doctor, the sergeant said. They are most concerned. They ask that the officer's effects be returned unopened. Of course they did. Did they? Now. Fernandez murmured. He tapped the case with one finger. It thudded dully. The sergeant shifted his weight. There is also interest from our German friends, he said, dropping his voice. Herr Mueller at the consulate has asked to be kept informed. The captain of the port says we should be cooperative. Fernandez frowned. Spain walked a narrow plank between British coal and German grain. Every minor official knew his actions might be weighed in Berlin and London both. A misstep could cost a career. Either way, the tide of the war would eventually pick a side, and the country would be judged by its small choices now. I will examine the body first, Fernandez said, properly, and then we shall see about cooperation. When Mueller arrived that afternoon, smelling faintly of cologne and sweat in his German cut suit, Fernandez had already opened the airway and peered into the dead man's chest with a stethoscope, more out of habit than necessity. Drowned, he said. Time in the water, perhaps 8 hours. There is some fluid in the lungs, some softening of the skin. Nothing remarkable. He did not mention the faint chemical scent he thought he detected when he opened the abdominal cavity. It could just as easily have been something from the harbor. Mueller's gaze, from the moment he entered, had been nailed to the black attaché case. And that, he asked, it has not been opened. Fernandez hesitated. Not yet, he said. The British object, of course, if there were a question of our national security. Mueller smiled thinly. Of course, he echoed. Doctor, you are a man of science. I am a man of information. If there is anything in that case which might threaten Spain's neutrality or your own safety, Berlin would be grateful to know. And Berlin can be a generous friend. Fernandez thought of the extra ration coupons that had appeared on his table last month after he facilitated a quiet interview between a German naval attaché and a local shipping agent. He thought of his wife's face when she found oranges in the market, rare and bright. He thought of the British consul's long, offended note demanding the immediate and unexamined return of the effects of His Majesty's officer. He looked at the case. Mueller added softly, "We were to open it and find nothing of interest. No one need ever know. And the British will be none the wiser for having been obeyed, in spirit." Fernandez nodded slowly. He took a set of thin lockpicks from a drawer, tools acquired in less legal days, now pressed into professional use, and knelt by the table. The lock resisted for a moment, then clicked. He opened the lid an inch, heart thudding. Inside he saw cream envelopes, the government crest dark against the paper, a sheaf of documents, smudged carbon copies. His pulse quickened. He shut the lid and looked at Mueller. "I will need a camera," he said, "and very steady hands." In Madrid 3 days later, a packet wrapped in brown paper and string changed hands in a quiet side office of the German embassy. Inside, photographs hastily taken, slightly out of focus, but legible. A drowned British major's last paperwork. The Abwehr man who decoded them rubbed his eyes after an all-night shift, lined the sheets up carefully, and began his report. In Berlin, a week later, officers in gray uniforms filed into a conference room heavy with smoke. The Mediterranean map was unrolled again. Pins were shifted, notes were added. From Madrid, intelligence from Spanish source. British courier lost off Spain. Contents of case photographed. Appears genuine. The summary lay on the table before the Führer. Hitler's eyes moved across the typed lines. His finger paused over a phrase, "Major operations in the Eastern Mediterranean theater." "Aha," he said sharply. "I knew it. The British will always go for the underbelly. Greece, Sardinia. That is where they will try to break us." Keitel cleared his throat. "My Führer. There remains the matter of Sicily." He ventured. "It is the more obvious target from their new bases in Tunisia. Our Italian friends. The Italians are donkeys." Hitler snapped. He jabbed at the Greek coastline on the map. "Here is the key. Churchill is an old fox, but he cannot resist his Balkan games. This." He slapped the report from Madrid with the back of his hand. "Confirms it." He turned to Kesselring's representative. "Reinforce Greece," he ordered. "Move a panzer division from Sicily. Strengthen Sardinia's defenses. Leave enough in Sicily to put up a show, but not a man more than necessary. I will not have our armor wasted on defending every rock in the Mediterranean." "Jawohl," the officer said, eyes flicking briefly to the map of Sicily, mentally subtracting tanks. Trains would move that night. On the Spanish coast, the dead man who had carried those lies to shore lay under a simple white cross in Huelva. His grave marked, "Wellemilai o Elmorment did 24th Apl 1943 beloved sof Joelo and Dabeo ar Marda val Iler do Artuai Martin of KRDF. Whilst none one of those names were real. In London, the telegram that made everyone in room 13 lean in so close their heads, almost touched arrived late in the afternoon. The cipher clerk brought it in on a small wooden tray, face carefully blank. "From Madrid, sir," he said. "Through the Foreign Office." A Montagu took the flimsy sheet and read. YAV reader NDFTS of MOAJOR MARTI estautu io evidenci of open on ras LSU estiop miao estopa ia analysis go FRMS tampi the ODCP I Hirikigari Rowan Messestio Garma Stikopi. His heart lurched. God, Cholmondeley said beside him, voice barely above a breath. They've bitten, Montague swallowed, the paper crackling in his hand. Or they've only sniffed, he said. We don't yet know if they swallowed. He sent a copy of the telegram upstairs immediately. In the dim, bunker, lit cabinet war rooms, Churchill read it in 3 gulps, lips moving. A grin broke across his battered features. Excellent, he said softly. Excellent, they have peaked. He scrawled in the margin in thick, dark pencil, for his own satisfaction more than for anyone else's, Muent si meet swo ale owod re her well. He wanted to write whole, but he wasn't a man to underestimate an opponent's digestion. At Bletchley Park, the listening posts went on sucking messages from the ether and feeding them into the hungry stomachs of the code-breaking machines. One evening, a young woman with ink, stained fingers, spotted a phrase repeated in a decrypt and called her supervisor. "Sir, there's something in this from Athens," she said, tapping the paper, "about reinforcements arriving from Sicilian sector." The supervisor adjusted his glasses and bent over the page. A week later, an ULTR summary slid across the Admiralty table in London. Montagu read the relevant line and felt the world tilt a little. Ephraim Okedu to arm giro p sub ject robelo wementi. St paziar dy vcuo be ans fiar Ephraim c sile tagar e sumendialy. He read it twice to make sure he wasn't hallucinating. He's done it, Cholmondeley whispered. Ooh, Montagu asked distantly. Cholmondeley's smile was crooked. Major William Martin, he said, our dead man. He's moved a panzer division without lifting a finger. Montagu laughed once, too sharply, then sat down abruptly as his legs reminded him they'd been standing too long. All the exhaustion of the previous weeks crashed over him at once. He thought of Glinder Michael, huddled in his final warehouse, stomach burning, lungs filling. He thought of the cold slab, the sheet, the canister, the slap of water as the body fell from Seraph's deck. He imagined an invisible hand, dead and pale, tugging at the map in the FUHR's headquarters. In the war rooms, Churchill listened as the ULTRA summary was read aloud in the red, lit gloom. Further reports indicate coastal batteries on Sardinia strengthened. Luftwaffe units moved from Sicily to mainland Italy and Greece. Churchill puffed thoughtfully on his cigar. So, he said, smoke feathering from his nostrils, our friend in Hilva has convinced Herr Hitler to guard the wrong bedroom window. He looked across at General Alan Brooke, chief of the Imperial General Staff. See that Alexander and Eisenhower know this, he said, carefully. I don't want them growing hubris, I want them to grow teeth. July 9, 1943. The Mediterranean was restless. Off the southeastern tip of Sicily, the sea heaved under a low, sullen wind. Whitecaps broke against steel hulls lined up like gray cattle in the night. In the troop holds of an American LCEL, Lieutenant Jack Porter of the 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment sat hunched on an overturned ammo crate, strapping on his reserve chute with fingers that didn't want to cooperate. Sweat trickled down his spine despite the night, cool air that leaked in through the hatch. A red bulb bathes everything in a bloody glow. Around him, men adjusted helmets, checked weapons. Crucifixes kissed, letters folded and tucked, last minute, into inner pockets. Above their heads, engines droned, the steady, chest vibrating thrum of C-47s waiting on a runway in Tunisia, revving. Porter's stick was due to load in an hour. He'd seen the maps, the drop zones around Gela, the objectives, crossroads, bridges, artillery positions. Hold until relieved by seaborne forces. If the Navy and the planners were right, German armor would be somewhere else when they tumbled out of the sky over Sicily. If they were wrong, he pushed that thought aside. On the bridge of HMS Aurora, one of the light cruisers assigned to bombard beaches ahead of the landings, Captain Bill Gladstone peered through his binoculars at the black smear that was Sicily. White forks of lightning flickered over the distant hills. Storms over the island. His gunnery officer muttered, "That'll play merry hell with the flyboys. Maybe it'll mess with Jerry's night vision too," Gladstone said. "If he's even there." He lowered the glasses. No one on his bridge knew that 200 German tanks that might have been waiting behind those beaches were instead swaying on flat cars in the Balkans. They only knew that within hours, they'd be firing tons of high explosive at an enemy shoreline, hoping they hit more gun pits than goats. The weather turned worse as the night deepened. In the C-47s, lightning strobed across the wings as they droned towards Sicily, buffeted by crosswinds. Porter gripped the static line until his knuckles ached. The jumpmaster's voice sounded too loud and too far away. 10 minutes. He crawled forward with the others, shuffling to the open door. Cold wind knifed in, ripping at clothes, clawing at faces. Through the rectangle of blackness, he saw flashes on the sea below. Naval guns opening fire, the invasion fleet announcing itself in thunder. Tracer arsed up from the unseen island ahead, red and green beads rising in jerky lines. Somewhere down there, machine guns waited, mortars waited, maybe tanks, maybe not. "Stand up," the jumpmaster roared. "Hook up." Porter clipped his static line to the cable with fumbling hands. Green light. Go! He jumped into the void. The world became wind and noise and flailing limbs. Then a savage jerk as the chute snapped open, slamming the harness into his groin and armpits. Below him, Sicily emerged in flashes, dark fields, lines of olive trees, glimmers of water and irrigation ditches. Around him, white canopies blossomed and spun, some swinging wildly in the gusts. Tracer whipped past, arcs of fire stitching the air. A burning C-47 tumbled down in the distance, a streak of orange against the black. Porter hit the ground hard, the gusts dragging him into a low stone wall. Pain exploded up his leg. He cursed, clawed at his lines, released the canopy before it could drag him further. The night was chaos, shouts in English and Italian, distant explosions, occasional rattles of automatic fire. He checked his leg. Nothing seemed broken, just a vicious bruise blooming under the skin. He took stock. He was in a field of stunted crops. Behind him, a small farmhouse. Before him, in the distance, the flicker of gunfire. His map was useless in the dark. His compass swayed. He was somewhere near where he was supposed to be, or miles off, like most of his battalion. As he gathered 3 other strays, paratroopers pulled from hedgerows and ditches, he encountered little organized opposition. A couple of terrified Italian conscripts surrendered at the sight of American boots and helmets, their hands shaking. Instead of neat German kill zones, there was confusion. Instead of panzers forming up for a counterattack, there were scattered outposts firing nervously and then going quiet. Far off, on the beaches, things were far from simple. At Gela, waves crashed into the bows of LCVPs, throwing spray over already soaked men. The ramp went down, and the first Americans of the 1st Infantry Division waded into a surf churned, white by shellfire. Machine gun bullets snapped past. Mortar bursts rained sand and shrapnel. Captain Frank Reynolds of Baker Company stumbled as a wave hit him mid-chest, almost knocking him backwards. He tasted salt and cordite and fear. "Keep moving," someone screamed. He pushed forward, rifle held high. Water up to his waist. To his left, an LCVP took a direct hit, the bow vanishing in a sheet of flame and splinters. Men disappeared, pieces of them flung into the water. On the beach, a concrete pillbox chattered red death down the shoreline. "Where the hell are the tanks?" Reynolds shouted, ducking behind a sand dune as a burst chewed the air over his head. Behind the transport line, in the churning sea, amphibious tanks floundered. Some had been launched too far out in the chop. Swells swamped them, one by one. Some disappeared with pitiful slowness, men clinging to their turrets, then slipping under. Mechanical failure. Bad judgment. Enough went down to turn the tide around the beached infantry into a chaos of floating men and wreckage. On the beach, though, there were still fewer panzers than there might have been. Instead of roaring counterattacks of Tigers and Panzer IVs at dawn, there were sporadic probes by Italian tanks, undergunned and under-armored, handled with brave but hesitant clumsiness. At Piano Lupo, the German Hermann Göring Division, what there was of it on the island, did mount a fierce counterstroke, lashing out at the footholds around Gela and Licata. Porter, marching with his small band of paratroopers toward the sounds of heavy guns, watched enemy tanks crest a rise in the distance, silhouetted by sunrise. He went cold. "Panzer!" someone yelled. The ground shook as they rolled forward. In his mind's eye, Porter saw those tanks multiplied fivefold, tenfold, as they might have been if the German armored divisions had remained concentrated on Sicily, instead of being bled away to Greece. He saw the beaches behind him, crammed with men and trucks and artillery pieces still bogged in dunes. He saw what would happen if those panzers hit that traffic jam, with a full-strength division behind them. But there weren't that many. The attack was sharp, vicious. Nebelwerfers screamed. Panzers rolled toward the American lines, firing, tracks churning up dirt. Navy guns answered. On Aurora's bridge, Captain Gladstone watched the splashes of his shells straddle a road, sending fountains of earth and dust into the air around the tiny moving dots of tanks and trucks. "Op 50, he ordered. "Salvo on my mark. Fire." The forward turrets roared, the deck shuddering under all that released energy. Cordite smoke flooded the bridge. Through his binoculars, he saw one of the black dots halt, smoke pouring from it. Another slewed sideways, stopped. The German counterattack faltered. Courageous infantry, left without enough steel beasts to crack the Allied beachhead. On the ridge where Porter lay behind a rock pile, firing until his barrel smoked, the panzers drew back. The math of war, a body count here, a missing division there, was being written partly by a corpse who had gone into the sea months before. Days later, once the beachhead had thickened into a coherent front, once Messina loomed as the next objective, once Hitler had had time to fulminate about Italian cowardice and demand impossible counterattacks from thinned out units, a folder arrived in room 13 at the Admiralty. Mark ESKY and Intil ESMN. Montagu opened it alone at his desk. The report smelled faintly of damp paper and sweat. It held numbers. casualties, wrecked landing craft, lost ships. But fewer of some things than there might have been. Opposition on certain beaches described as lighter than feared. German panzer strength, significant but not overwhelming. He ran a finger down a line that made his throat tighten. Enam armora divilstiran gh associdatap piro 60% off exp tud half. Not none. Men had still died in the surf, under machine gun fire, in olive groves and on dusty roads. Paratroopers had hung from Sicilian trees where swirling winds had tossed them. War hadn't become kind overnight, because of one deception. But half the iron teeth had been somewhere else when the first men came ashore. Montagu sat back and rubbed his eyes. His desk was littered with flotsam from Major Martin's fabricated life. Drafts of Pam's letter, a spare theater ticket, a photograph of the real girl who'd lent her smile. He looked at the empty space where the briefcase had been before they'd handed it to the courier. The door clicked open. Churchill stepped in with the air of a man who had no time for corridors, accompanied by Alan Brooke and a secretary clutching a notebook. Montagu shot to his feet, chair scraping. Sit, Montagu, Churchill said, waving him down. We are all of us tired men and the chairs do us good. He took in the cluttered room, the maps, the photographs, the ashtrays full of cigarette butts. So, Churchill said, it appears our little charade in Spain has had some effect. Montagu swallowed. Yes, sir. Bletchley confirms multiple German redeployments. Field reports from Sicily suggest armored strength there was significantly weakened. Churchill lit a fresh cigar from the stub of the old one, his hands trembling just enough to make the flame wobble. Hitler believed the lies in those letters, he said. He saw a drowned major and the contents of his pockets, and decided that his own insights were being confirmed. That is the most delicious kind of deception. We told him a story he already wanted to hear. He exhaled smoke, leaning on Montagu's desk. Do you know his real name? Churchill asked suddenly. Montagu blinked. Sir. The man, Churchill said. The body. Do you know who he was before you gave him that splendid false life? Montagu hesitated. Yes, Prime Minister, he said quietly. Glyndwr Michael, from Wales, a laborer. He died alone. No one claimed him. Churchill nodded slowly. Well, Mr. Michael, he said to the air. You have not been entirely overlooked after all. For a long moment, they were all silent. The war still howled outside these walls. There would be more invasions, more deceptions, more bodies. Nothing was settled yet. But on one island in the middle of that blue sea, the balance had tipped a little further in their favor. Because one unknown man had been dressed, named, and abandoned with intent. Months later, once Sicily had fallen, and the Allies had stepped onto the Italian mainland, Montagu traveled on official business to Gibraltar. On his way back to London, his aircraft stopped in Lisbon to refuel. Territorial squabbles and delays meant a long layover. He took a brief detour. It was a complicated arrangement of permissions and denials, but eventually, under a white, hot Spanish sun, he stood in the British cemetery in Huelva. Under the shade of thin trees, the hum of insects loud in the stillness. The grave was easy to find. The stone was clean. Someone had placed a small bunch of wildflowers there, already wilting. Major William A.M. Martin, it read, as the Admiralty had instructed, as if he had always existed. There was no mention of Glyndwr Michael. Montagu stood for a while, his hat in his hands. He remembered the feel of the dog tag in his fingers, the cold skin under his touch, the way the canister had steamed when they opened it that night on Seraph's deck. He pictured Churchill, pen hovering over the authorization, bombs falling above, deciding that they would weaponize death itself. "You rewrote a map," Montague said softly, not caring if anyone heard. "Not bad for a man no one wanted." The wind shifted, bringing with it the distant sound of the sea. Behind him, unseen beyond the cemetery wall, waves rolled in and out against the Spanish shore where once a fisherman had hauled an impossible weight from his nets and cursed under his breath. Far away, on another day's map table, men pushed colored pins across paper and wondered how the enemy had managed to slip their strength past their gaze. They did not know that part of the answer lay under the Hilva dirt, wrapped in a uniform that had never been earned, marked by a name that had never belonged to him, under a stone paid for by a government that had used him one last time. In the end, the living moved on, carrying new plans and new lies into new rooms. The war room's lamp lit hum resumed. Churchill picked up other pens, signing other deceptions, other assaults. But somewhere in the labyrinth of his mind, in the part where he tallied the strange, dark bargains of total war, was the memory of the morning when he'd signed his name under an order to send a corpse floating into enemy hands. He had bent the life of a continent in some small yet undeniable way, by weaponizing the quiet weight of a single anonymous dead man. The ink he'd laid down that day had dried long ago. Its impact, written across